everyone, and welcome to our BetterUp Insights briefing on our just released report, The Future-Minded Leader. Today, we will be sharing key takeaways from the latest BetterUp Labs research centering on one critical mindset for facing the inevitable uncertainty of 2022, future-mindedness. My name is Erin Eatough, and I'm our Manager of Behavioral Science here at BetterUp.
And I'm Maggie Wooll, Head of Strategic Insights and Managing Editor at BetterUp.
As we dive in today, please feel free to follow along by downloading the full report. Our team will drop the link in the comments section now. Also, feel free to share your questions and reactions in the comments section. Our team of behavioral scientists are monitoring, and they'll be sure to get back to you in real time. All right, now that we've got that covered, let's dive in. So, Maggie, your career has been focused on making insights and research actionable for people and organizations, and you have spent so much time thinking about how science and research can help us better prepare for the future of work. And I'm thrilled to have this conversation with you today to take each of the insights from our report and really give them context and interpretation for individuals and organizations. So to set the stage, before sharing the top 5 insights from our recent research, I want to just share this really powerful stat. Half of us say it feels impossible to plan for the future today, impossible to plan for the future. And I don't know about you, Maggie, I think I am in that bucket. Between the surges of the pandemic, the unknowns that come with that, travel disruptions, staffing shortages, supply chain issues, there's so many ways that even like the most diligent planning at work and in personal life, it still feels tenuous at best. And yet we know from research that thinking ahead and envisioning the future outcomes, being able to plan, that's really vital for just our overall well-being and success. And it's not only a key part of reaching our goals, of course, but it also kind of protects our mental health. And so with so much uncertainty, our relationship with the future, it's like really complicated right now. Is that how it's been feeling for you too? Or is it just me? I don't think it is.
You are not alone. Yes, it has gotten complex. It's gotten complex for us as people. I mean, I'm trying to plan a kid's birthday next week. I'm thinking about summer travel plans, and I'm trying to make some work and career decisions. And right now, each of those 3 feels kind of equally like I'm throwing darts at a dartboard. But it's also gotten complex for businesses. I mean, companies and entire industries are innovating and adapting around these ever-changing COVID restrictions. Think about like airlines and hotels and education for sure. But it isn't just the restrictions. Businesses are also trying to keep up with the changing needs and expectations of their customers and of their employees. I mean, we're all kind of collectively facing new challenges to our mental health, to our physical safety, and to our productivity every day. And when I think about it, like the traditional planning and forecasting tools that businesses have, they're not really helping that much to prepare our teams or their leaders for this. And, instead, we have a lot of organizations that are kind of stuck there, waiting for more decisive answers. And meanwhile, the door opens for disruption and for talent loss.
Right. I know. This new research is really about kind of the skills that we really need to have to be able to navigate all of that. So in the research, we asked this question: what is the right strategy to create a path forward so that we have an agile roadmap, like something like Google Maps or Waze, where we can sort of seamlessly pivot to the next best route when a crash or a traffic jam sort of unexpectedly appears?
My God, if only there were ways for life, how great would that be? One thing we all have to get used to, and I keep reminding myself of this, is that there are going to be bumps in the road and we're going to feel them, right? The idea isn't that we all armor up like we're driving tanks and just go, straight through, stay the course, no matter what happens on the road. We still have to be aware of what's happening around us and up ahead. And sometimes we're going to change course as a result. And so that's just the way it is. That's what we're working with then. One thing I think that's really interesting about this is what we're talking about. This is something different from just decision making, right? It's more like preparation.
Yeah, there's a concept that's been described by some really prominent academic researchers, Marty Seligman, Roy Baumeister, others, and they have called this concept prospection. And that's the ability that we all have to think about the future and envision what's possible. And humans are really unique because we have this capacity for imagination. We can imagine the future and plan with strategy, with our executive function, and we all do it. And so this is one step ahead. It's one step before kind of decision making. It's the process we go through to imagine and visualize possibilities along the way, and then use that to help us decide and plan for the route or detours that inevitably come, and be resilient to change in the process.
Okay, right. So then building on that concept of prospection, we can define what it means to be future-minded, right? So being future-minded is a mindset that balances like optimistic action on the one hand with kind of pragmatic thoughtfulness on the other in order to envision these possible futures. So if we start with optimism, that doesn't mean that the world's all rosy or that everything's going to work out perfectly, but just that we can see the upside and that we're kind of deliberately and actively looking for the upside, looking for the opportunity within change, and that we're also confident in our own ability to take action and shape outcomes. And then on the other hand, we have this, it's pragmatic, right? So we're giving ourselves the space to reflect and say, well, what could change, right? What could get in the way or upend this plan? What type of information would I learn that could make me suddenly realize that like this course of action that I'm on right now is no longer the best route?
Yes. Yes. So what you just said, Maggie, that's exactly what inspired this set of research. This idea of prospection or future mindedness, as we refer to it, combined with kind of the massive amounts of uncertainty we live with today, was what we aim to really address. So we did a large scale survey study and a series of experiments to understand how future-minded leadership is helping people to navigate uncertainty, what holds us back from being effective in envisioning the future, and then how we can get better at it and hone the skill.
That makes so much sense. I was just thinking like, what was running through my head is how this research study was just so timely, Erin. I mean, COVID really it stripped that veneer of like planning and predictability for so many people. And so when we see these stats that like people feel like they can't plan, they feel like they can't move forward, they feel deeply, deeply stressed by uncertainty. In that context, the findings of this research are really helpful and really hopeful. So I know that you have 5 findings that you're going to share with us. And the first one is really about how this is helping people personally, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the first finding is across 1,500 full-time U.S. workers, we learned that individuals who are future-minded, they're more productive, they're more resilient, and they're overall just more satisfied with their lives than their peers. So the benefits are showing up in both work and life. But here are a couple numbers related to what we saw that are really compelling. And this is about mental health. So future-minded leaders are 34% less anxious and 35% less depressed than those who are low in future-minded leadership. And you think about kind of the tools that we have as individuals to combat anxiety, especially in the face of this pandemic. And, I don't know about you, but most people, I think, myself included, kind of think about like, oh, meditation, mindfulness, sleep, self-care. But most people aren't considering that the way you think about the future, the way you do or don't embrace kind of many alternatives for how things could go, about that being really powerful to support your personal thriving.
Okay. So what you're talking about is really, it's really more cognitive. And we don't always think about it this way, but we can actually choose, and we actually have the power to choose how we approach the future. And we can choose, and it affects our mental health, but most of us are kind of in this default mode when it comes to how we deal with uncertainty.
Yeah. And yes, honestly, I mean, I see a lot of people doing kind of two things to cope with the uncertainty we're in. They either kind of like deny the uncertainty and just sort of kind of plow forward, like craft one view of the future. This is the way that I hope and want things will go. I'm going to make this travel plan. I'm planning to attend this conference or wedding. And then the downside is that something changes inevitably. And you get rocked a little when things fall apart due to these unforeseen or, unanticipated circumstances. But then on the other side, I see some people just sort of surrendering to the uncertainty and that they're just like throwing their hands up. They're just not planning. Like we can't plan in this kind of condition. And so it's sort of like an avoidance of thinking too much about the future because it's just too hard. And either of those things, either of those strategies can be really hard on our mental health. But then there's this third way. It's much less common, but when people kind of learn this and do this well, there really are huge personal benefits and benefits in business. And that is this mentality of future mindedness. So it's the generating multiple possible futures, many alternative scenarios, and kind of doing a mental dress rehearsal on each. And really just constantly holding space in our minds and in our way of operating on the day to day for a slew of possible outcomes.
Yeah, it's funny though. I mean, when you're saying that, it makes sense. But then again, it sounds almost counterintuitive, right? It's like, how can thinking through what might change or what might go wrong to mess up my plans, how can that possibly make me feel less stressed? Isn't that just going to bring more anxiety, make me anxious, like thinking like, oh, this could happen or that could happen. Disaster is clearly going to strike. Yeah, the research shows that this kind of approach to uncertainty can be incredibly empowering. That when the curveballs come, even though they're totally different from whatever you had imagined, you aren't in shock or denial, right? And you remove some of that negative aspect of surprise that we have. Mm-hmm. So I guess what this makes me wonder, Erin, is what's the difference between this kind of like envisioning possible futures and more negative behaviors like dwelling or ruminating on all the things that could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, great question. And Maggie, I know my husband is a rescue helicopter pilot in the Coast Guard, and they do something called chair flying. And really that's playing out the various scenarios, the ways things could go right or wrong in a flight, and what the next steps would be should a set of possible events happen. And it's visualization. And then should something come up in real life, it's something the crew had already chair flew. So they've been there mentally. And it's not exactly the same thing as perspection or future mindedness, but the parallels are there.
Yeah, I love that phrase, chair flying. So what I understand about flying helicopters, which is entirely based on me sitting in my own armchair right here very safely, is that every situation is unique. That was really clear when I used to watch Coast Guard Rescue with my son. They expect to encounter unique and challenging situations. And this idea of chair flying kind of prepares them to be really good at responding calmly and effectively. So, when it happens, the pilot isn't like personally crushed by the idea that the wind speed's changed. Instead, they just focus on what to do next. And not getting sucked into that negative emotional reaction helps them move faster, see more possibilities, and work together better. So when I think about in that way, why I think future mindedness then is so helpful is that it kind of readies us and steadies us to be less reactive and less overwhelmed when things inevitably do change. Future mindedness kind of gives us a chance to feel ahead of the curve. We get some agency in a world where otherwise we might feel kind of out of control. And, I think we also have more confidence then in our own ability to navigate complexity on the fly, which is, as I think we can both relate, it's like really a key skill, whether you're at work or not at work.
Yeah, totally. So one of the other major insights from this work was about how it shows up at work, right? And the benefits and honing this skill in people, especially people leaders, means stronger teams. So there is that payoff in organizations when people can do this really well. And specifically what we saw was that teams with a future-minded leader are 18% higher in performance, 18% higher in innovation, 25% higher in agility. And these teams are more resilient by 15%, more engaged by 19%. So future-minded leaders seem to help people around them as well to kind of glide over the bumps a little better. And it is a little intuitive if you and your team are thinking through all these multiple futures, mentally rehearsing them. It can create a resilience to change, more agility, more performance. But there was one thing that I thought was really fascinating, and that was a finding about innovation. And so we also saw in the data that teams with future-minded leaders have teams that are more innovative as well.
Yeah, I mean, this was, I guess, surprising to me. Future-mindedness creates space for innovation, right? So when I think about innovation, part of it is the behavior that the leader is modeling for the team. They focus on possibility, the team learns to as well. The leader imagines the team forward and, gets curious, asks questions, maybe about what assumptions make a plan work or not work. They lead their team through kind of the cascade of events. And then working backwards from that, that opens up space for a team to consider additional possibilities, to think about like, how might we design for this future that we hadn't thought about? Or how might we change the design to accommodate several different futures? So that's one side of it. But what was interesting to me is that this also really speaks to, I think, the type of environment that a team needs in order to be innovative. So, I think we know from research that the inability to plan makes us feel powerless. And that causes this, a lot of emotional turmoil. We start seeing everything as a threat, and we get tunnel vision. Now, one natural reaction to that is to try to exert more control. But in the type of ambiguous and changing environment we have at work, you need your teams to be agile and innovative. Well, what does that mean? That means that those teams need to be trusting each other. They need to be taking ownership. They need to be experimenting and taking risks. But at just this moment when they need to be doing that, your stressed out managers are running around, clamping down on everything and trying to micromanage. Innovation can't happen there. You have a situation where employees are getting burned out, they're not doing great work, and they're looking for the exits. So companies and organizations need future-minded leaders in order to create space to have innovative teams.
Yeah. So you just described how important it is for teams. And another question we asked in the research, Maggie, is how common is it that teams have these kinds of leaders? And what we learned is that future-minded leaders they're not super common. In our survey of 1,500 workers, we found that 82% of people have significant room for improvement in at least one area of future-minded leadership skills.
Yeah, well, all I can say is if 82% of us have significant room for improvement, then I'm relieved to know that I'm in great company, because it can be really hard to be optimistic and pragmatic, when you just found out, for instance, that the parts you need have been delayed 6 weeks, or that the entire marketing event you've been planning for just went virtual, or that your contractor got COVID. So that makes it difficult, but it's really encouraging from the research that there are specific skills associated with future-mindedness. And these are skills that we can work on. We can learn them, we can grow, we can improve through them. And, just like decision-making, some of us are going to be better at it than others, but it's something we can all improve.
Yeah. And it was interesting too, because one of the things we did in the data was we also tried to sort of understand where future-minded leaders are showing up. And we found that some aspects of future-mindedness correlate with company size, but only to a point. So let me explain. So as companies grow from really small sizes, so thinking like 100 employees or fewer, up to about 1,000 to 5,000, between that size, a core part of future-minded leadership, the flexibility to change and sort of that agility to be adaptable when change comes along, that shows up more and more and more. So those organizations tend to have a large, representation of these future-minded leaders. But once a company grows past, say, 5,000 employees, the prevalence of people high in the skill starts to level off.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, what's interesting about those findings on company size is that I think it really shows how our work and our work environment, whether that's the culture, whether that's the way leaders share information or encourage risk taking, all of this affects whether we individually are developing future mindedness. If you think about it, like in a small company, you have this line of sight to everything that's going on. And that makes you more aware of possibilities and just, the chain of events. Then, your company gets a little bit bigger and you get more resources. Well, you still have the line of sight, but now, because you have more resources, you suddenly have an idea, more of that sense that like, hey, I can actually take productive action based on what I see. But then what happens is you get to a certain size and you start losing that visibility into events and dependencies. And at the same time, you also kind of lose that sense of ownership or that belief that, what I do and the choices and actions I take actually matter within these changing conditions. So I think, what that tells me is, for organizations that want to develop this mindset, especially the larger ones, it's key that they look at what obstacles might be getting in the way, in addition to what they can do to build these skills in their people. And, so I guess that kind of begs the question, Erin, which is like, what do we know about what companies can actually do to develop this future mindedness in their people and to start getting those benefits?
Yeah. So that's a great segue into our experimental research and the studies that the team ran. So two of the insights from that experimental work are about, number one, kind of recognizing our own biases. And number two, incorporating one specific practice that can really help us embrace a more future-minded approach. So the experimental research was really incredible because it blended sort of the ideas of how future-mindedness intersects with the needs that so many organizations face for innovation. And most of us are pretty good at kind of seeing the pros and cons of any new idea or any new solution. But when we're in the innovator's hot seat, which is arguably any leader today, and that kind of flash of inspiration comes, it's as if we sort of lose the ability to have a clear-eyed take on both the good and the bad potential consequences of bringing a new idea or solution or invention to the world. And it's that tendency to only kind of see the positives that we call the innovator's bias. And it can have real consequences for our strategic planning, our thinking through these alternatives, and to the success of any innovation for organizations. So in an experiment, we induced the innovator's bias in 462 participants, putting them in the position of being an owner over a new idea, over a new invention. And over several iterations of the study, the owners consistently rated their ideas, their products, as being primarily beneficial for society. But a neutral control group, on the other hand, consistently gave balanced ratings of those same products, pros and cons. So what this demonstrated is that the more involved we are, the more attached we are to our ideas, to solutions, to inventions, we kind of get a foggy-eyed view. We become less clear-eyed about the potential impact on our customers and on the world at large. So that was one experimental study. It was, uncovering this innovator's bias, this bias that we all have, and how we think about the future of ideas and solutions. And Maggie, I'm curious, how do you see kind of building an awareness about the innovator's bias useful as we all think about preparing for the future?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's just fascinating that they were able to do that. So how does the innovator's bias and being aware of that really help us for the future? I mean, on the one hand, as a leader, I think it's just really helpful to understand that we aren't nearly as objective as we like to think we are. The research shows that merely through being asked to consult on a project or help with the naming, we get involved enough that we develop an owner's mindset and become biased in favor of the innovation. So that means if your company has, innovation review panels or advisory boards, they're pretty susceptible to innovators' bias as well. Now, with awareness, now we can be more deliberate about getting distance and perspective on, our ideas or our products. And we can consider different outcomes, not just the one that we hope for or that we want. And with that, we can be more realistic about plans and more ready to let go of what isn't working and to recognize it when that comes. This is all the more essential when complexity and the pace of change are really upending the kind of traditional experience-based planning in our companies. That the past does not predict the future. And the pandemic didn't exactly create this problem, but I think it really shined a light on the fact that anticipating, preparing, just being both mentally and emotionally ready for the kind of the tide changes and the sneaker waves, that's something that everyone, especially leaders, must do. And it's especially important when you are in a position of power or influence.
Yeah, exactly. And it's important for leaders to recognize that everyone building future mindedness and kind of creating space for everyone to participate in forecasting is actually really important. And part of the reason that is because frontline workers, they're usually more in touch with what's changing earlier. They're closer to the customer, they're closer to the market, they're closer to the engineering or the design barriers and constraints. And so getting diversity and seeking input is going to help you as a leader to kind of awaken your future mind and to see around corners a little better, prepare for potential obstacles and opportunities. And there's one quote that I'll share with you from the former CEO of Intel that I really thought resonated with these ideas. And it was from Andy Grove. So what he said was, you need to plan the way a fire department plans. It cannot anticipate where the next fire will be. So it has to shape an energetic and efficient team that's capable of responding to the anticipated as well as to any ordinary event.
Yeah. I mean, what I love about that Andy Grove quote is really the word team. I think the word team is key here. So future mindedness is something that everyone can benefit from. But then as an organization, you can benefit from more people having. It does have to start with leaders, though. I mean, leaders will set the tone and model the behavior as I talked about. But they'll also be the ones who have to make space for the types of practices that strengthen future mindedness within the work itself.
Right. And so, yeah, we also did an experiment to kind of understand what practices can combat the innovator's bias. So I'll tell you about that now. So in BetterUp Labs' second experimental study for this, we ran some trials that included several different strategies. So one was sort of thinking in different time frames, into the future and trying to envision different sort of time waypoints or milestones. Another was sort of thinking through the perspective of others and how an innovation would impact others, and their kind of interpretation of that invention or innovation. But what actually worked at the end of the day was this strategy, and that was envisioning the worst case scenario. So what works to outsmart the innovator's bias and help us be more effectively future-minded is deliberately forcing our minds to the worst case. And perhaps why that is because it then allows us to kind of at least acknowledge the range of possibilities that are in between.
It's funny. I can see how some would find that practice of envisioning the worst case scenario and really getting into it, right? Like really creating the story around that. I could see how some people might find that kind of negative or pessimistic. And I think it's a valid concern that this would, kind of kill your enthusiasm, kill your team's enthusiasm for this product, and just maybe destroy your passion for this thing that you're all working on.
Yeah, I see that, but that's actually not what happened. So the data showed that bias was decreased. So the innovator's bias was kind of neutralized, but participants had a more balanced assessment of the potential benefits of their innovation while remaining unchanged in terms of their enthusiasm for it. So It was pretty amazing. We could kind of help participants to both get clearer eyes so they could make more effective decisions about moving forward, but still kind of have full hearts for the product.
It really is amazing. The fact that people can get a more balanced view and still, be both practical and keep their passion. These kinds of super pragmatic insights are just so incredibly powerful because they're simple. They're easy to remember and straightforward, but they also come with so much evidence of powerful impact. And, when I think about this research, Erin, what I love about it is that there's so much here for anyone who's leading an organization or working in an organization to take away from it. But there's also a tremendous amount in this research for someone to just take back into your own personal life.
Yes, well said, Maggie. And I think we got through all 5 insights. So just to recap for everyone, those insights were, we talked about future mindedness being correlated to personal well-being and mental health outcomes. We talked about future-minded leaders having high-performing teams who aren't just more engaged, but more innovative as well. We also talked about future-mindedness being a skill that's both uncommon and harder to find in large organizations. We also discovered through the experimental research that we can become victims to the innovator's bias, where we can't see the full range of concerns about ideas when they are our own. But we can combat the innovator's bias by creating a habit of asking, what's the worst that can happen here? And envisioning the worst case scenario. And while I could stay here all day and keep talking about this great research, I think our time is up. So Maggie, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you to all of you who listened in. If you have any questions, again, feel free to comment below and our team will get back to you. And if you found this conversation interesting, be sure to download the Future Minded Leadership Report using the link, as we were only able to just scratch the surface today. So thank you for joining us. We hope you were able to glean some insights that will help take you on a future-minded leadership mindset. Until next time.